Hi everyone, my name is Tatiana, and in front of me today I have the Hero Arts Premium My Monthly Hero Kit for the month of July 2023. It includes a 6x8 stamp set, a set of dies which includes some dandelion dies and a background die. There's a linen stamp, a reactive ombre ink pad that goes from blue to green. There's another set of dies which includes some picnic related items. There are some wildflower die cuts, and there are 4 sheets of cardstock, 2 of which are wood grain white cardstock. Okay, let's get right into making some cards. So I took one of the pieces of cardstock that are included in the kit, and this piece is called Passion Flower. And then I took some thistle ink, which you would think is the same color as this cardstock, but it isn't. It's a different color. And my nails even match, so this card was meant to be. And so anyway, I'm taking a brush and I'm just going over this very lightly to create a gradient of color just at the bottom of the card. And you could do this with any color of cardstock and ink. If you have a matching ink and a matching cardstock, just pick a color and you can make this card in a different color. So all I've done is taken the small little stamps from the set, the individual flowers and the smaller clusters of flowers, and line them up along the bottom of the card and stamp them in black ink. And like I said, this would be a really nice set to give to a friend if you did this in a variety of colors. If you have matching cardstock and matching ink, just put them together, shade a little bit at the bottom, and then when you have, especially when you have a stamping platform like this, it just makes it so easy because you've got the stamp on the lid, and then all you have to do is swap out the different colors of cardstock each time, and the stamping, you might as well be stamping 6 cards if you're stamping 1 card, because it really doesn't take all that much longer. So once I've stamped all these little flowers at the bottom, I'm going to bring in the sentiment which says "Have a beautiful day," and I'm going to stamp that with some embossing ink. And once I do that, and do it once or twice just to make sure that I have enough embossing ink on the card, I'm going to use a white embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set it, and it's going to work out pretty well on the first try. And after that, we're just going to trim it down a little bit so that it creates a little more interest on the front of the card. And I think I took about 20% off the top of this colored portion. At first I was going to trim it right above the top of the flowers, but then I thought, no, I'd like some more of the gray, I'd like it to be more obvious that it goes from dark to light. So after that, I was about to put it right onto the card, and then I realized that the stamping of that particular flower wasn't perfect, so I just took my pen and just went over it. Don't be afraid to do that. If your stamping is missing a little bit and you didn't notice it until you took it out of your stamping platform, just take a pen and go over it. Nobody will ever know. And then I remembered that I forgot to use the grass, so I brought the grass in. And the grass is really easy to use. I didn't even need the platform. It's just you can't go wrong with that grass. And then I decided to raise that panel up a little bit with some foam tape just to give it a little bit of shadow when you put it there on the card. And that's card 1, all done. Okay, let's talk about card number 2. This is the most fun I have had making a card in a really long time. So the piece of colored cardstock on the left was made using the ink pad, just swiping it across a piece of cardstock twice. And I used the baguette die to cut out 3 different pieces from that one because I wasn't sure which color I wanted to use. And when I saw the water die from this month's kit, for some reason all I saw was hair, and I thought I've got to use that as hair. So I cut out 4 pieces of hair from brown cardstock, and I just trimmed it along the edge there so that there wasn't a straight edge. I just tried to make it look a little bit more like hair. And then I used the grass die to cut out some hair also from the same piece of cardstock, and I used the dandelion fluff to do the very same thing. So all I'm going to do is there's only 3 pieces here, but I did cut out 4 in total, and I'm just arranging it here on the card to make it look like somebody's hair on one side of their head. And then I just free-handed an eyeball. I just took scissors and cut out an almond shape, I guess. which is very simple to do. And then for the iris of the eye, I cut out from that same piece of paper that I cut the baguettes out of, I cut a circle. I just freehanded a circle and drew a black pupil in the middle of the circle. Once again, really easy to do. Then for the mouth, I cut out a mouth shape and I just trimmed it down a little bit. And then I got a paint pen. So I used a paint pen, but first here I used a Micron pen just to draw the separation of the lips top from bottom. And then I pulled out this paint pen just because I liked the color and it just happened to be sitting there on my desk. But if you want to make lips, you could use anything you want, any color of marker or paint or pencil crayon or anything to color the lips red. You could even cut them out of red cardstock. And I purposely didn't color, like I left some white in the middle of the lips just for some interest. So the baguette is going to be the hair clip, and the hair clip, I felt like it needed some finishing, so I took a piece of gold cardstock and just cut a little rectangle out of that and put that on the edge of the clip just so it would look a little more like a hair clip, because the hair clip almost always has metal on it. So I attached those together and I just sort of placed that. I'm just sort of placing things on the card for now because I'm not 100% sure where they're all going to go. And then I feel like the hair is in the right spot, so I'm just going to get some glue. And I was very liberal with how I was putting the glue. I wasn't trying to have it perfectly, glued down in all places, because hair is sort of free flowing, right? So I wanted it to look a little bit natural. So I just kind of, loosely glued it down, let's say. And then I put the other one on the top just for now because I knew that I was going to place these other hair pieces in behind. I was sort of wanting it to look a little more wild, I guess. Want the hair not to look like perfectly glued down to the paper. So I've got that little piece and I'm just gluing it down. And I think I should have put it a little bit lower because it sort of gets covered up by this other piece. And then these other little pieces of hair, I sort of tucked into the waves of the water, if you want to call it that, just so that it would look like there was some sprigs kind of coming out of the hair, just to make it look a little more natural once again. And I think it would be really fun to do this with different colors of hair. Like you could make a redhead, or you could make her blonde, and you could use a different background color. I just happen to be using this. Actually, what that background piece of cardstock is it's an old file folder. So it just happened to be in my scrap drawer, and I thought, you know what, that kind of looks like a skin color. That's why I used it, because it just sort of matched a skin color. Close enough, anyway. So I'm using some foam dots to pop that hair up, just because I wanted there to be a little more dimension, some more shadows in behind the hair, just to make it look a little more like hair. And then the fourth piece of hair I'm going to use for the bangs. So the pointed part was a really nice piece to use. It just looks like her bangs are kind of swept to the side there. And then the other pieces of hair I had to kind of strategically cut so that there were points on the end of them so that they would look more like hair. And then I freely cut an eyebrow for her. And I think if I were to make this card again, I would probably cut the eyebrow out of the same wave die cut as the rest of the hair, because just so that it would match, but I didn't think of that at the time for some reason. And so the dandelion fluff now are going to be her eyelashes. So I'll just cut the stems off the dandelion fluff, and then it's almost like you're putting false eyelashes on her, because you put like a little line of glue along the edge of the eye, and then I just kind of wiped it off so there wasn't too much glue, and then just applied the falsies to her. Well, they're not her falsies, those are her real eyelashes. Just kind of put those on, and now it's starting to look like a real face. This was just really fun to do. Like, I can't stress that enough. It was just so fun. And so I think I cut another eyelash just because she didn't have enough eyelashes. Also, you can give her different expressions depending on how you place the eyebrows, right? Like if you place the eyebrow pointing down, she's going to look angry. If you want her to look quizzical, you could place it, slanted upwards to the left, but I just kind of left it natural. I kind of just wanted it to be like a neutral looking face, I guess. So at this point, we're going to turn the card over, cut off the rest of her hair that's overhanging the side of the card, and then we'll bring in the barrette. And at first I wondered if the barrette would look good through her hair, but then I thought, no, that's not really the way a barrette works. It's usually on top of the hair, so I decided to go with that, and I glue that down. And then I also added another little piece of hair to her bangs, just so that her bangs would look a little fuller at the front. And then once I do that, I just go ahead and chop off the piece on the back. And then I bring in the picnic basket die, and I cut that out of a green cardstock, cut off the handles of the picnic basket, turned it upside down, and I think it looks a bit like a turtleneck on a sweater that's going up her neck. And then the obvious sentiment for this card is Go Wild. I think this would make a really good birthday card. If you stamped Happy Birthday on the inside, it would be really cute. So then I felt she needed some eyeliner, so I took a pencil crayon, and be careful, you have to sharpen that pencil crayon so that it fits between the piece of paper and the base of the card. And I just drew in some eyeliner so that her eye was a little more defined. So that's card number 2. Now for the next card, I'm using a die from a set called Frightful Things by Tim Holtz. But if you don't have this set and you want to make some ghosts, all you have to do is cut a ghosty shape out of a piece of white cardstock and draw 2 little black eyes on it, and you've got ghosts. So I've taken a piece of the cardstock that came with the kit, cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using Pine ink by Hero Arts to shade loosely around the edges, leaving a lighter area at the middle. And now I'm switching over to black ink, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do some shading around the edges at the lower portion of the card, once again leaving an area in the middle that is lighter, so that when I take the card and put it over this green area, there should be like a lighter area right where the tree opening is. Now, I've also cut that background die out of some black foam. And if you do this, when you cut it out of the foam, you should run it through the machine 3 or 4 times just to make sure that that die has cut the holes perfectly. And I did get a good cut, but you do need to sort of poke the smaller areas out with a pokey tool, because there will be some tiny little bits kind of stuck together. So I'm just connecting the 2 layers with some glue, the black cardstock and the black foam, and this just gives some nice dimension to the card, so that when you put your background in behind there, there's some shadows created by the different layers of the card. So I've also cut some grass out of black cardstock to just layer in behind the scene, just to add a little bit of extra something extra to it. And I'm just going to glue that flat down onto the green portion of the card. And you can see it just adds a little bit. And then I'm going to tuck some in on the right hand side. I think I decided I will do that later. Now I'm just adding a little bit of extra shading, which I'm not sure did anything there, and so now I'm going to tuck the ghosts in, and they were a little tricky to get in there because their arm kind of sticks out. I wanted them to come out from behind, and then their arm to stick out on top. So I placed their body in behind, and then you kind of have to fiddle with it to get the ghost to stick out. And then I realized that ghost was too far up, so I end up peeling him up later. But this, I like the one on the right. He's really jumping out there. It's like he's jumping out from behind that bush to scare you. So I ended up peeling that one up that I glued down, and I just tucked him a little bit lower, but you can't tell where I ripped him off because I'm just going to glue on top of that. And I'm just, once again, loosely gluing that ghost because the rest of the card is going to be glued down on top of him anyway. And so I added the grass back in there because I think there was a little boo-boo I wanted to camouflage. And this guy's going to jump up out of the out of the trees on the right-hand side. Once again, just loosely gluing him just so that his arms have some movement. And I just left the arms and the head without glue because I thought it looked cuter that way. So I got some glue on the front of this card, and when you get glue on a black card, it's not the greatest. So I'm taking my pokey tool to go into the little recesses to get the excess glue out of there. And then I'm going to use a glue eraser for the glue on the front of the card. And this glue eraser works perfectly. If you don't have one of these, I recommend you get one for all these little glue mistakes that you make. You can just erase the glue, basically. It just comes right off. It sticks to that, and it's like magic. It just takes it right off. And so for the sentiment, I'm also using a Tim Holtz stamp set, and it's called Tiny Text Halloween. And I just love that stamp set because it's a whole bunch of little phrases that they're all individually cut, and you just pull out the one you want, and it's in a typewriter font, which I also think is really cute. So I'm using some embossing ink here, and I'm also going to use some white embossing powder. And I got a little bit too much embossing powder on the card, so I'm just going to take a very tiny little paintbrush and wipe off the excess and then heat set it. And it's just such a dainty little stamp. I love it. And then I'm just going to trim it down a little bit. And I didn't add any extra dimension to this sentiment because the card already had the foam sort of, making it dimensional, and I didn't want it to be any more dimensional. So I just trimmed it and then just put some glue on the back and added it to the bottom front of the card, and that's it. I just left it the way it was, and I just love this card. And I just added a white panel so that you would be able to write in it since it's a black card base. So that is card number 3. So if you watched my video from last month, you'll remember that I made a card with a lot of ink blending involved. And this is the paper that was underneath that ink blended card. And when I looked at it, I thought, wow, that's really beautiful. I wonder if I could somehow cut this out and use that frame on a card. So that's exactly what I did. I cut out the colored part and into a 5x7 shape. And then what I did was, because the middle of it is white, I ink blended some pale yellow ink onto the center portion, which I didn't film, but that's why the middle of it now is yellow instead of white. And I put that in my stamping tool, and I added the stamp from this month's kit that has all the flowers, that large flower background, and I used a brush to add some green to the grass portion of that stamp. And then I just took a variety of colors and I used a brush for each of the flowers in a different color and ink blended using the brush onto the flower. Now, what ended up happening was, for some reason, this piece of paper did not want to stay. As you can see, every time I pull the door up, it moves the paper, which is what this whole tool is supposed to prevent happening. So I don't know if it was my magnets weren't, large enough for the paper or what was happening, but every time I pulled the stamp up, the piece of paper moved. And what ended up happening was the stamping of this card ended up being a little bit off each time I stamped it. Now, normally that would be upsetting, right? That wouldn't be something that you would want, but it ended up turning out really, really cool because the card itself, the edges, the border of the card, that is what was the impetus for this card in the first place, is kind of a muted, fuzzed out looking effect anyway. And so when I stamped and the stamping wasn't perfect, it just kind of matched the border of the card, and I ended up really liking it. And so I just went with it. I just, if it double stamped or it's stamped a little bit to the side of the first stamp, I just left it. And in the end, the flowers that were perfectly stamped were like, I was almost thinking, should I put this back in and stamp them again so that they're all kind of fuzzed out like that, but I didn't do that. But as you can see, every time I pulled the door up, the paper moved, and then you're supposed to be able to place it back in the corner, but for some reason it just didn't work. But it ended up turning out, I like it like this. And it's weird because I never would have thought of making a card like this with a border like that, but it's just a border that I already had. And so, it just teaches you something. Now I think going forward, I might want to make a border in this way. Just by putting a piece of paper down and sort of ink blending along the border in different colors to start out with. I'm going to try that again sometime in the future. But anyway, so I used just a variety of different colors of inks, and I just kept, blending and stamping and blending and stamping and blending and stamping. And then I went back and used some green. And eventually the card was complete. And it sort of reminds me, it's like sort of a vintage look, like that's what I think of when I look at the card. It just brings back like these lazy, hazy days of summer, maybe back in the 70s or something. That's just the feeling I get when I look at the card. And so then I stamped the sentiment using sand ink because I didn't want anything too dark. I wanted something just sort of muted to go along with the colors that were already in the card. And sand was like the perfect color to go along with that. And then once I finished stamping the sentiment, I thought this card needs a little butterfly. So I stuck the little butterfly that came with the stamp set in there, and I ink blended some blue just into the middle of the butterfly. And then I did it again. And that's what's nice about using a brush, is you're not putting a lot of ink on the card, and you can build up the ink as you go. So then I switched to pink, and I swiped the pink on the tips of the wings. And when the two mixed together, the pink and the blue, it just created a really pretty color. But there were parts of the card where the ink blending wasn't perfect, so I just took a piece of paper and I pretended like there was a card base there again, and I just blended around it. And then as you can see on the left-hand side, last month there were some there were some water drops for that card. I was making an undersea card and I wanted there to be water drops. So there were already some water drops on the card on the left-hand side in the dark purple area. But I wanted it to match on the other side. So I just took some water, sprayed it out onto my finger and sort of dabbed it down and created some water drops. And then I let it sit there for about 5-10 seconds so that it permeated the ink, and then just went back with a paper towel and dabbed at it. And it's a nice way to put water droplets where you want them. Like usually when we're making these droplets or sprays, it's very erratic. You're just kind of dripping them and you don't know where they're going to go. But this is a way you can do it so that they're exactly where you want them. And so now the card matches on both sides. And there's a close-up of the card just to show you what it looks like. Okay, so for the last card, I just took the ink pad and I took the linen stamp and stamped it in both directions, added some water with a spray mister, and I'm very lightly putting it down. There's a lot of water on the stamp. That's what's creating those big soupy areas, but you're also getting the linen texture. So it's like the best of both worlds. You've got the linen texture and these big water-heavy areas that create a non-texture. So you've got the two together. And when I was stamping this card, I was on purpose leaving a lot of white space. And the reason for that is because you can do this and cover the whole background in blue and green, which is also pretty. But the reason I'm leaving like a lot of white space is because I know that I'm going to be using some die cuts on this card. And the die cuts this month have a white border on them that is pretty thick. So if you were to put these die cuts on a card with a solid blue and green base, the white of the die cut would really stick out. But in this way, leaving some white space, it matches. The white of the die cut matches the white of the white space on the card. So I've just got the die cuts in a rainbow order. I don't know if you noticed that, but they're going from red, orange, yellow, green, blue. Well, it's not really a blue, it's like a violet. And then I've got this little brown bush that's going on the edge here. And then I just take the grass, and the grass is has got some foam underneath it so that it's up a little bit from the rest of the card. And once again, I'm going to use that Go Wild stamp, which I think looks great. And I didn't stamp perfectly, so I got my Micron pen out just like I did before and filled it in and added it to the green card base that came with the kit. So that's it for this month, and I really had fun making these cards. I hope you enjoyed watching. Please subscribe if you liked what you saw, and give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you next month. Bye.